and our statutory framework to be more nimble when it comes to business development, particularly for small businesses, innovators, and entrepreneurs. I think that this tax proposal is perhaps one piece of that puzzle, but I know that there are also some very exciting developments happening in our sister states in removing barriers to entree for entrepreneurs to help them start and expand businesses. I chaired the Business and Innovation Task Force during my last term in the legislature, and that was really rewarding to be able to figure out how to update and modernize some of our tools to help small businesses succeed. And I think we have a lot of work to do to continually stay ahead of the curve to make sure that we're doing things both great and small to remove barriers to innovation and entrepreneurship, and that can pay great dividends for our citizenry and our state. So I'll look forward to working with Senator Wayne and others on some of those ideas in the interim and through next year. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Reapy announces some guests in the North Balcony, 74th graders from Sandoz Elementary in Omaha. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Wayne, you're recognized to close on your amendment.
For those who are watching at home, it's not that people aren't engaged. People are thinking about we need a break and a rest from this place. This is a magical kingdom. Sometimes it's real and sometimes it just disappears. And this is one of those moments where it just disappears. So again, I will withdraw this amendment and we will work on this through the biennium and figure out how to make this a little better legislation for next year. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. The amendment is withdrawn. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, next item, Senator Raybould would move to amend with AM 1650.
Senator Raybould, you're recognized to open on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. AM 1650 is one of the first triggers I'm proposing. And I really can't take credit for this. I'd like to, but it probably came from Senator John Stinner on coming up with a mechanism that is really more objective so that state senators don't need to really think too hard about where we're going. This sets parameters on when we can continue the tax cut. So I just want to refresh with those that are watching that what we've done today is we voted against adding more to the child care tax credit. And also we also voted today to reduce the amount of the child care tax credit. All the senators know full well that the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce, our business leaders in our state of Nebraska are recommending that we as a state need to be more progressive and forward-thinking on workforce issues that we're facing, the shortages that we're facing. Number two, affordable housing, and number three, child care tax credits. Child care. What can we do both on the corporate level and the individual level to increase the number of daycare facilities, early childhood facilities, and the affordability of that? So looking at this on the AM 1650, this is a more complex trigger, and I will give probably Senator Stinner all the credit for doing something like this. But if we're so bullish, what have we got to lose for putting this trigger in? If you think that we're going to just blow past all the general fund forecasting, and if you think we're going to maintain our cash reserve level, what have you got to lose? This is pretty common sense economic practices and policies. It does no harm. Could we please have a gavel? Thank you, Mr. President. This does no harm. It really is a does no harm bill, doesn't change any of the forecasting or anything like that. But what it does, it's a trigger. And I'm going to explain this. It's pretty simple. So if you look at your green sheet in the general fund net receipts, it's saying, and already the forecasting is showing that we're going to blow past the general fund receipts for the next year and the next year and the next year. So that doesn't change it. But this trigger says for the general fund receipts, if you want that next year's tax cut to be realized, then it has to be the general fund receipts plus the inflation rate. We've already established that the inflation rate last year was 6.5%. It has come down to, effective at the end of April, 4.9%. So really, you're just having general funds have to stay flat plus that 4.9%. That's not a big deal, according to all the forecasting and projections here. We shouldn't be afraid of implementing something like that. You might want to be afraid of this next component of AM 1650, because this is a pretty important trigger. They're both together. It says the cash reserve must have at least 16% of general fund expenditures for the prior year. So that is something that was passed under Senator Johnston as well. This is something the body agreed to, that they want to maintain that 16% of the general fund expenditures in the cash reserve. This gets a little more complicated, but it would require the prior 2 years, the most recently completed fiscal year, to not have decreased from the prior year by more than 2%. So it's saying that those cash reserves that have to be 16% of your general fund cannot go down by 2%. That seems pretty reasonable to me. That's a great trigger. If we are so bullish and so gosh darn certain that we are going to hit all these forecasting projections, you have absolutely nothing to lose by supporting this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Raybould. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I want to rise in support of Senator Raybould's amendment and really want to compliment her for her thoughtful leadership in regards to putting some appropriate guardrails on this tax package that is before us. It is sound fiscal policy. It does not do anything to hurt the underlying program design. It does not do anything to drive up the price tag, but it does ensure that we have appropriate safeguards in place just in case our projections are not as rosy as we might want them to be. It's undeniable that there's a significant amount of economic uncertainty coming out of the pandemic. It's unclear exactly what the long-term impacts of this one-time infusion of pandemic relief is going to be after we utilize that and use that all up. And we have some cautionary tales out there from our sister states that shows cutting too deep, too fast has had negative impacts to their state's quality of life and ability to provide critical services. So this is really, I think, a thoughtful approach to just ensuring that we're a bit more careful. And if those rosy fiscal projections don't come to fruition, it just provides a clear signal to all stakeholders that these are some of the mechanisms that we will utilize to ensure that we can have a high quality of life and a balanced budget, and will ensure that we're not moving too fast, too deep, and are unable to pull back from that if we do have any downturns in our economy. So I really appreciate Senator Raybould bringing forward the idea and fighting hard right up until the last minute before a long break that everybody is very, very eager to get to. It shows her seriousness as a policymaker, and I am eternally grateful that Senator Raybould brings her business brain with her everywhere she goes. I've had the chance to know Senator Raybould for a long time and serve with her on the government committee, and she reminds us of her business background very, very frequently. And I think this is part of that prudent, conservative approach that a businesswoman like Senator Raybould would bring forward, and that is good business, is good fiscal policy, that should be a part of this historic and massive tax package at the very least. So I'm grateful to her, and I would encourage everybody to vote for this measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I agree with Senator Conrad. And Senator Raybould has worked very hard on this, and she's talked to me about it, and I understand where she's coming from. I just simply disagree. What Chairman Stinner did way back when we did 1107, as part of the agreement was we would, anything over 3.5% growth would automatically go into the rainy day fund until we got to 16%. And I said this again, but it's important for us to understand this. That ends, I think it ends this year. So that thing is going away. And if you go back and read the 1107 fiscal note, you will see when you try to, excuse me, when you try to control the future and try and tell the legislature is going to happen, it didn't go the direction anybody anticipated it to. Turned out to be a good direction, but not what anybody thought we were doing. We also have to remember, and somebody mentioned this on the floor, that we have 16 or a goal of 16% in the rainy day fund, which we rarely have ever had. But we also have 3% minimum reserve. So we really have 19% setting aside. Plus, again, we got the Education Future Fund. Triggers are a bad idea for this reason. When businesses look or individuals look where they're going to invest money and what their future is going to be, what the tax rate's going to be, they don't want to but for. They don't want to say, okay, Nebraska's headed to 399, except maybe they'll change their mind, or maybe they'll have a bad year and they'll stop it all. That's not what we're trying to do here. What we're trying to do is give certainty into the future. And the trigger, we have a trigger. If something goes very opposite of what everything's telling us is going to go, there will be a legislature. The legislature has a responsibility every year to look at this. So we don't need a trigger if something goes awry. You could posit the next legislature could come back and raise taxes. This is not, it's just a bad idea, because the goal we're trying to do is say we're going to be competitive with every other state, but we don't need that gold say unless we're not. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Raybould, you're recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues, for sticking around for another half an hour as we talk about this. Triggers are a fundamental, practical tool to use in government. It makes sure that we're true to our commitment on working within guardrails that keep our state moving forward. I have reservations. I have concerns. We're doing something that we've never done before in this state of Nebraska. The legislature is now poised to do in a single year of tax cuts and transformative measures than has never been done before. There are amazing things that we're doing as a state that I commend Governor Pillen, that we're definitely going to see a win on. We are going to win when it comes to shifting the burden on public education from our property taxes to the state of Nebraska, where it should belong, where hopefully we're not going to be number 49 anymore. We're going to be maybe 45. That's great. We're winning on that one because that's a big deal. Maybe this is going to take us to the middle of the pack so that we're not at the bottom of the pack. That's how transformative shifting the funding for public education that we're very proud of, and that our state of Nebraska has demonstrated that we already excel in. Nebraska is in the top 5 of all the states in the United States for the quality of our public education. We should be very proud of that. What takes us down in all the tax rankings is our property taxes, the burden that it puts on our hardworking middle-class families and businesses. So I asked my colleagues, really, what are we doing here? We don't have to be a race to the bottom in terms of being competitive. We are already competitive. What do site selectors look at when they look to locate to a state like Nebraska? Ideally, we're right in the center of the United States. You can't beat that. We're near all the infrastructure that they need and supply lines and make it very ideal to be in Nebraska. We have a top-notch public education. We have an educated workforce. But what we have that are to our detriments, decreasing workforce. Lots of our young people want to get the heck out of our state. Senator Dungan and I were at the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce meeting a couple of weeks ago, the first part of May, and one of the CEOs asked me, are your colleagues aware of some of the harmful, hurtful legislation that they're passing that are a detriment to our state, that are causing our young people, our physicians, our young families to want to leave our state? And I said to the CEO, I said, no, I don't think they're really aware of the harm that that legislation is doing in the short term and in the long term. And those families are important to our economic well-being. Those families are important to our economic growth. They're important to our growing our state of Nebraska, growing our tax base and our general funds. So for that reason, it's certainly reasonable and practical. My colleagues feel 100% certain.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President, that their forecasting numbers are sound. I disagree. Why? Because I look at numbers every single day of my life and make really important decisions on the numbers I see and future indicators as well. I am bullish on our state. I love our state. There's every reason why we should be optimistic. And if we're optimistic, we should be doing fiscally conservative practices and using all the economic tools that keep our state safe, that keep our economy moving forward. And that's why I ask you to please vote for AM 1650, reasonable, responsible, conservative fiscal policy. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 1650. There's been a request for a roll call vote. Oh, call the House, excuse me, Senator. There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
15 nays to 12 nays to place the House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chambers, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senators Armendariz, DeBoer, Ibaugh, Rapey, and Hughes, please return to the chamber and record your presence. The House is under call. All unexcused members are now present. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 1650. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
14 ayes, 29 nays on the adoption of the amendment.
The amendment is not adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, new LR.
I raise the call.
Senator Bostelman, LR 162, that'll be referred to the executive board. Next amendment, Mr. President, Senator Rabel would move to amend with AM 1651.
Senator Rabel, you're recognized to open on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I asked my colleagues if they could stick around. This won't take very long at all, I promise you. But just want to refresh what we've done so far. We voted against adding more to the child care tax credit. We voted to cut the child care tax credit in half. We voted no to adjusting a bracket to allow the middle income earners so that they could see a tax credit. So AM 1651 is very easy, very, very simple. The other version was much more complicated. This one is very, very easy. It talks about the general fund net receipts. So it's asking that we focus on the general fund net receipts, and if they are less than the previous year's net receipts increased by inflation. So they have to stay flat plus inflation. That's it. They have to stay flat plus inflation. So if you look at our green sheet, our forecasters and the revenue committee have worked so hard. It shows that our general fund, they're going up substantially for next year and the next year and the next year. So we should be fine. We should be able to afford everything that we have put forward to our taxpayers and giving the enormous corporate tax cuts as well as the individual tax cuts. So basically, it just says we want to make sure that we're not going to go to any further tax cuts if the general fund isn't flat plus that rate of inflation. So let's review. The rate of inflation so far this year is at 4.9%. Last year it was at 6.5%. The average over 50 years of rate of inflation, CPI, is about 3.83%. So if we're realistically looking at it, we're saying that, okay, that the most that we're asking is that it be general fund stays the same as the current year plus 3.83%. That's being very conservative. That's not exceeding any, it's actually probably below some of the forecasts, but that's another trigger before we can execute on the next tax cut for that year. So I ask my colleagues, please support this. I have a feeling that it may not go my way today, but I'll be back next year and we'll have revised forecasted numbers. But I do ask you support this. This one is easy. If we are so 100% confident that we're going to blow past the numbers we've forecasted, you have nothing to lose. So I ask that you kindly vote for AM 1651. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Seeing no one else in the queue, you would be recognized to close on the amendment.
Thank you. I would like to waive any closing remarks.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 1651. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
10 ayes, 28 nays on adoption of the amendment.
The amendment is not adopted. Mr. Clerk, for items.
I have nothing further on the bill, Mr. President.
Senator Ballard, you're recognized for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 754 be advanced to ENR for engrossing.
Members, you have heard the motion to advance LB 754 to ENR engrossing. There's been a request for a record vote. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
37 ayes, 4 nays on advancement of the bill.
The bill is advanced for ENR engrossment. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, new LR 163 from Senator Hughes. That'll be referred to the executive board. Senator Mosier would move to adjourn the body until Tuesday, May 16, 2023 at 9:00 a.m.
Members, you've heard the motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. We are adjourned.